Hi, my name is Gerald Wolfe. I grew up in Paterson, New Jersey. I went to art school at the School of Visual Arts, and then following, I went to Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in Maine. I always felt my work was connected to painting and sculpture. Both, it was sort of I always felt it was an intersection between the two, because when I first started doing work after graduating from school, the pieces that I was doing were sculptural pieces that would bend out from walls or fold out from walls. They would be hinged. Mostly would be on plywood. And I would do paintings on the plywood. I would use shapes abstract shapes, but from templates that I would find, that I found interesting. And I would cut pieces out and then put the pieces back in, cut them out of the wood. I would use saws. I always had this very physical work, which is why I've always worked with wood and heavier materials. Mostly over the years, it's been plywood, concrete. I was doing some concrete reliefs for a while. So I'm always working with a very physical attitude towards my work. I'm very rough with my paintings. Recently I've been using drop cloths on the surfaces of a painting like this. This is called Cloud Painting 3. I would use drop cloths as opposed to just using canvas, because I like the roughness and the sort of the porous and the rough quality of the drop cloth. And if I didn't like a section of it, I would cut out a piece and glue a new piece of drop cloth down. You can see a cut here that was cut out, and there's a piece here that's been cut. But to go back to the initial idea for these paintings, these cloud paintings, I found a board in my basement of where I live, and it was about a 12 by 12 inch board, and it had a bunch of joint compound on it in the center of the board. I looked at the joint compound, and it looked like a cloud. So I brought it up to my studio and started working on it and playing around with it and looking at it and just hanging it up. And I started trying to define the shapes of the cloud in this painting with black tape. I have this 1/4 inch black tape, and I just started playing around with trying to find the contour of this cloud that was in my mind, or that was on the board, but as I saw. And I tried to use the black tape to find the contour and also in the shadows. So I started, as I was working with it, I would start putting this tape on the board, which is similar to this. This is what got me started with using the black line. And I was just playing around with the shapes that were forming from the tape. And before it was over, it was this abstract painting. It lost a lot of the cloud-like element to it, but it was something that worked well for me. So I started doing some more paintings, and I started working on this painting. And when I start these paintings, I usually just randomly put the tape down. I applied the drop cloth to the wood surface, to the panel, and then I put white paint on it. And then I would just randomly put the tape down and just play around with the shapes. So I'm always working with these shapes and trying to form patterns and create depth and things coming forward. I see lines going back and angling different directions, but I'm trying to create sort of an ambiguous space. The black and white spots that you see are from a stencil. I try to create shadows or indicate shadows, not create them. But I don't want to create the shadows by just painting a realistic shadow. So these are areas what I see as where shadows would be, because I see this piece coming forward, this going back, so that's where the shadow would be. But I also put this shadow on the foreground, just to create an ambiguity, like what's going forward and what's going back. And after I was working on these pieces for a while, I looked at them and I said, boy, these would be interesting. They could be interesting sculptures. So I would start thinking about these as sculpture. So I was trying to figure out how I would do this. I was working with this cloud idea, was still in my mind. So I started working with these cardboard tubes that would be similar to the ones you would find in like paper towel rolls, and I would just take them. These were heavier duty cardboard tubes, and I would just take them and randomly just put one down and glue a couple other tubes to it on angles. I would just lean it against it, glue it down, and then just put it up and just look at it and try to figure out. I thought these pieces were going to be this tubular, cylindrical kind of sculptures, but I wasn't really happy with that. So I started putting slabs of these pieces of board out of the lath that you would find behind plaster walls. I found a bunch of that on the street, and I would glue it to these cardboard tubes, and they became these sort of blocky sculptural pieces, but they were very hard-edged, and they had a cubist type quality to them. I wanted to sort of get away from the blockiness of it, so that's when I started working with plaster, and it was much more fluid for me, even though it dries really fast, which is also good because it's sort of a quick thing. But I started working with the plaster, and I started using plaster gauze. So on some pieces, like on this piece here, this came a little bit after the first sculptures. I started doing these in between these pieces and the first ones with the cardboard tubes, or the cubist type ones. I was doing these small pieces. I saw this installation at the Metropolitan Museum of these there were fragments from a Greek temple. And they were just broken pieces. They had the designs from where it was broken off. And they were just sitting on these bases, like just a display base. And they were just lined up, and I said, well, that would be interesting to do something related somehow to that. So I started doing these. I was working on some pieces for a small work show, and I wanted to do these small pieces, and I started making these pieces that were smaller than the initial ones with the blocky ones, but these were very simple shapes, like the shape of a simple chair and a simple table. They weren't intended to be a chair and a table, but that's the way I saw them, so that's how I titled them. And they would just be on a base, and they seemed to work really well. But then when I wanted to get a little large, and I started using paint and plaster on those, mostly plaster in the exposed wood. When I started working these were a little larger than those pieces. Those pieces were probably 5, 6, 7 inches. This is more like 13 or 14 or something. And I work on the paintings and the sculptures the same way. They're very intuitive. I cut things out, and I'll glue things onto a piece like this, and I'll glue things on, and I'll take a saw and I'll cut it off, and I'll put the piece to the side, and maybe I'll put it somewhere else, or maybe I'll put it on another piece that I'm working on. So a piece like this, you can see how this is a sharper edge here, and then if I didn't like it, I can't remember exactly how I did it, but I would cut a piece off, and then I would wrap it with some of the plaster gauze, and it became like a concave. It just broke up the shape as far as being just a block. And like I cut something off here, but I left this piece because it indicated a shadow to me. So I'm just playing around. It's like I said, it was the same way I work on the paintings. It's very intuitive, very whatever happens, and eventually there's something. They almost take me where they want to go. These pieces. Then I wanted to create break up the plaster. So I took the tape again, as I do on the paintings, and I just moved the lines around, or the tape around. I put pieces down where I might want a line or a hole. Some of these pieces have little holes in them, drilled holes. And they would, so on this piece, I like the way this piece of wood was just found in my studio. I used it. It has stuff on it from previous pieces of work, and it just bends around the back. So it's that kind of movement and playing around with these pieces that I do. And like I said at the beginning, I see these being really related as far as being painting. I see it's a painting that's very sculptural, and that has painting qualities to it as a sculpture. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me and explain my work. You can find out more about my work on my website, geraldwolfeart.com.